Howdy. I am just out of basketball, and I am sweating like a pig, which is fitting because I am here to tell you about the swine infesting Advance OU, Dugtrio. I didn't even plan that. I just must be the opposite of what Dugtrio is in Advance, which is terrible, just like my ability to get a coherent sentence out right now, but I'll do my best. And if you're wondering why I'm recording like this, or if you saw that short I posted, which lasted like 2 seconds, with just, oh, is Dugtrio now broken in the title? It's because I still have not bitten the bullet and told my girlfriend. It'll be one of her Christmas presents. I'm sure she'll be thrilled about that. But enough about my eyes wide shut ass holiday plans. What? Who said that? Yeah, this video is inspired by a debate that took place today, spearheaded by Triangles. But it didn't come out of nowhere. People have been discussing it more and more lately. Obviously, ever since ABR and his lead Dugtrio shenanigans started popping up, then, it started bringing the question up more often. But it was more the straw that broke the camera up's back. Nice, thank you. And because these issues had been brought up more and more before. Now, you may recall I made a video some months ago about how, was it months or was it last year? Who knows? It was back, who cares when. It's why Dugtrio is not broken in Advance OU or something like that. I'm sure you can find it if you feel so inclined. So the basic premise was that Dougie is uniquely not banned in Advance, or Arena Trap to be more accurate, as opposed to every other generation, because every other generation is power crept. So that means that when you get the trap off with Dugtrio, it's more devastating with your abusers, right? So with Dug in Advance, the abusers are not so powerful that you get trapped in, it's immediately game over, unless you have a bad team. Whereas with Gen 4 and onward, then the answers to the more busted threats are more limited. Therefore, you can just get trapped by Dugtrio, and then yes, you might have a good team that is otherwise just completely ruined. Which stereotypically generally tends to not be the case in Advance. Now, it's still mostly the case. I don't think that's really changed, but I think the reason why I've been, revising my opinion a little bit, I'm not so sure that the pendulum has completely swung to the other side, but I wouldn't mind it coming down on Dugtrio and removing it entirely, God, that was good. I'm on fire for a guy who just ran for 90 minutes straight. So, autofellatio aside, yeah, that aside, the idea is less, Dougie is broken, although, there are some people who have that opinion, and more just that what Dougie does is enable an unhealthy type of play, just because of how one-sided trapping is as a mechanic. What about Magneton? Well, Magneton obviously does not have the same reach as Dugtrio, nowhere near. And yes, it did inevitably come up in that conversation. It's like, well, the Spikes game, Magneton, Scarm, Fortress, CB Lock, Metagross, but it's one step at a time, okay? Because obviously, there's a lot of anti-Doug sentiment. Could have just said pro-Doug, but, don't ask too much of me. So the pro-Doug side, obviously the arguments are there. That also applied to when I made the first video on Dugtrio, which was that, it's hard to switch in because it's frail. Oh, God. I just saw a taxi driver in a theater on Friday. It was great. And now it's just got me thinking, all the animals come out at night. Speaking of, anyway, point being, yeah, it's tough to switch Dugtrio in. It doesn't necessarily KO the things that it's trying to trap. But, to get too hung up on this is almost to miss the point. Like, yes, it is a point against Dugtrio, but it's not like Dugtrio needs to trap, full HP, super bulky Pokemon only. Or, it doesn't even necessarily need to KO something to effectively remove it from commission. And I'll give you an example that recalls another generation. In Gen 7, then Dugtrio was often used against Tapu Bulu, not because it was using Sludge Wave or anything, just to Toxic it. And before you think that sounds ridiculous, oh yeah, your big trap Pokemon comes out of the trap house, oh my god, I'm sorry, but I'm really not, to just Toxic something. And then you realize, look, in some games, your win condition is Tapu Bulu, right? And that win condition, ordinarily, you would not let it get Toxic ever, because then you lose the game. But with Dugtrio, you can't avoid it. There were even cases of similar things happening in Gen 5. Like, you would see Dugtrio Toxic a Hippo, and suddenly that Hippowdon that you were relying on for longevity, suddenly it's hindered. And just taking that choice away is inherently one-sided and starts skewing the game. So, to bring it back to Advance, because I agree that cross-generational examples shouldn't really be taken into account, it's not even necessarily that Dugtrio will take something out. It's just that Dugtrio will bring something to low enough health to where it's no longer a factor. Like, if your Dugtrio KOs the Blissey, or if the Dugtrio brings the Blissey down to, 10%, as long as you don't let a soft boil, which you probably won't, then you're fine, right? So, it's a point well taken, but it's also somewhat to miss the point. Then the other point against Dugtrio, from the old guard generally, and I'm not faulting these points necessarily, just bringing up the fact that they have been thought of before, and I don't think that they really hold that much water. Which is like, oh, do we really want to change a 20-year-old metagame? Which, change scares people, or, okay, that's a little dramatic. I don't think people are really frightened of change. That was a bit of an exaggeration, but it's more that, I like the game the way it is. Do we have to change it? The answer is no. Advance is going to be a fine metagame no matter what, pretty much. But seeing as it is so actively played, if we can improve it, we should, right? And this is where you get into a whole policy debate on, like, oh, well, what do we do after Dugtrio is banned? Do we have to ban Blissey? And the answer is, well, if you have to ban Blissey afterwards, then you ban Blissey afterwards. That's not really an argument against it. I know people have an aversion to a big ban list. I don't know why, because it's not competitively minded. So if we have to, cut half the OU tier out, then that's what we have to do. But yeah, with Blissey, for example, because that one gets brought up, I think, and I'm not the only one, that Dugtrio, sorry to appeal to, others to validate my point, so I'll illustrate it more clearly. I think Dugtrio enables Blissey way more than it keeps it in check. If you're over-relying on Dugtrio to take Blissey out, you're either running special offense or, I don't know, you're doing something wrong. But, yeah, and the special offense will also adapt. How? I don't know. This is a complete massive change to Advance. I think it's ridiculous when someone says, oh, well, prove the metagame would be better without Dugtrio. There's never such proof, ever. There's only the intuition of the player base that we would have something better. Then we would have to play it. Then we'd have to test it out. And if the Dugtrio ban winds up being a mistake, we just bring it back. Theoretically, anyway. I understand that the bureaucracy of Smogon gets in the way of, doing things so practically, idealistically, even though that's theoretically how it's supposed to work. But if something is such a negative presence, I don't believe we should just, put up with it and grin and bear it because it's been in the game forever, so we're used to it. I mean, come on. I think if you don't really give if you don't really care one way or the other, then I don't know. I don't think, personal comfort should get in the way of making the game better. If it's going to be played this actively, if it's like a GSC situation, which doesn't have a big player base at all, then yeah, I understand. Although I guess, you can make the argument, if there's only that many players, then they can do what they want. And if there's a lot of players, then, it's being played so actively that you can do things more democratically. I don't know. I'm not really interested in the policy of it all. I'm just interested in the possibility of a Douglas advance, because now for the arguments, obviously, arguing for such a large change and potentially more changes following, even though I don't know, with Blissey, for example, like T-Tar, Metagross, then half the reason why these teams at ABR, for example, has been spamming are so reliable is that there are only, so many Pokemon that really take Blissey on. Excuse me. And they are vulnerable to Blissey. So, to Dugtrio. So that makes it easy for them to... it makes it easy for them to take out your, because it doesn't matter if you have to throw away your Claydol or whatever. If that means you trap the Heracross and then Blissey walls everything else, because Blissey already worse. Well, it does, but it walls a disproportionate amount of the OU tier list anyway. So it's not like you're going to be loading up on teams that have like 5 Pokemon that deal with Blissey. And if you do, you probably have a very flawed team that Blissey's teammates will not have much trouble taking advantage of. So, and I mean, there are other concerns like, Jirachi gets broken without Dugtrio. Well, if it does, goodbye Jirachi. People also mentioned Celebi, but I think Celebi's a lot easier to handle because of the sand weakness. But, if Dougie is... I think if Dougie is keeping something from being broken, then that thing is probably broken anyway, And I already have some less than positive thoughts about Jirachi in advance, just because of Serene Grace being ridiculous. So you will not see me shedding tears over an inability to Serene Grace Ice Punch your way through Swamperts, or to spam Fire Punch because LOL it burns everything that isn't a Charizard or a Moltres, who obviously don't like switching into the possibility of a Toxic. So I'm oversimplifying. Obviously, there are ways to get around, Jirachi Fire Punch burns, but it is very limiting, and the RNG element is ridiculous. So, so just inherently all the reasons why, to make a rather sweeping statement, all the reasons why Doug is undesirable in the other generations apply to Advance pretty much. And yeah, I mean, just because you can feasibly run Superman teams. There's a guy yelling at me. Or maybe not at me, but he was drunk, and I think that was Ukrainian he was yelling. So, it wasn't Czech though, and I don't think it was Russian. Believe me, I would know. Anyway. So, I'm a good citizen waiting for the light to change, even though there's nobody around. So, basically, we are at the point, potentially anyway, where we're saying, look, Advance isn't special, and the reasons why Dugtrio needs to go is, it's not a new idea. It's basically, all those reasons why Dugtrio is ridiculous in the other generations? Well, Advance is not really an exception. We thought it was before, because we took things on a metagame by metagame basis, right? It wasn't like, Dougie's a problem in one gen, therefore we're going to just axe it from all the rest. We had to go through the process for, 6, 7, 5, 4, 8 as well. I don't even know if Dugtrio was in Gen 9. But yeah, so far it hasn't really been a problem. I mean, the idea's always kind of been around, even before the whole Yeah, I'm starting to lose it. Even before the whole mass removal of Arena Trap across the gens. But now we're kind of... Yeah, the issue is... I mean, yes, it enables a lot of offense, but also keeps a lot of offense in check a little too easily. I think I've kind of alluded to this before in that video I made, like, it's called like the problems of Advanced OU or something. It's in black and white. It's got the mystery man from Lost Highway in the thumbnail. But yeah, so like, for example, if you've got like a super fat team that's just, you know, one wall after another, then Metagame, for example, is going to clean your clock. But if you just throw a Dugtrio on there, then, you know, yeah, you can say, oh, substitute. Oh, you just have to play well to get around the Dug. You can play well and get around broken stuff. Or, you know, Dugtrio in every generation. So it's not necessarily an argument against it. Anyway, I don't feel particularly strongly one way or the other. But, yeah, I hope that this goes somewhere. And I'm going to end the video here because I'm about to go continue. I'm going to bite that bullet soon, I swear to God. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next one, which I hope is soon.